Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his brow as he finished loading the last crate of medical supplies into his transport shuttle. The mining colony on Zirion 7 had been hit by a rare bacterial outbreak, and as the only qualified xenobiologist within 3 sectors, he'd volunteered for the relief mission. The pay wasn't much. But Marcus had never been one to turn away from people in need. The journey to Zirion 7 took him through the disputed territories near the Draconian Empire's borders. Most humans avoided this region entirely. The dragons were an ancient, proud species with technology that made human achievements look like children's toys. They barely acknowledged humanity's existence, viewing them as nothing more than primitive mammals who'd stumbled into space travel by accident. Marcus didn't share the common fear most humans had of dragons. Sure, they were massive, fire-breathing creatures with scales harder than titanium and minds sharp enough to calculate hyperspace jumps without computers. But in his years studying alien biology, he'd learned that intelligence often came with deeper emotions, not less. The dragon's reputation for cold calculation might just be a mask for something more complex. His shuttle's navigation system started beeping warnings as he approached the outer rim of dragon space. The automated message was clear. Unauthorized vessels will be destroyed without warning. Marcus had filed the proper diplomatic channels for emergency passage. But dragons weren't known for their quick responses to human bureaucracy. A massive shadow passed over his shuttle, blocking out the light from the nearby star. Marcus looked up through the viewport and felt his breath catch. A dragon battlecruiser hung in space above him, its biomechanical hull gleaming like polished obsidian. The ship was easily 10 times the size of his shuttle, with weapon ports that could vaporize a human destroyer in seconds. The communication array crackled to life with a voice that sounded like rumbling thunder. "Human vessel, you have entered sacred dragon territory. State your purpose, or be destroyed." Marcus activated his transmitter with steady hands. "This is Dr. Marcus Chen aboard Medical Transport Sierra 7. I have emergency authorization for passage to deliver critical supplies to Zirion 7. My clearance codes should be in your system. In Lukli Haver." There was a long pause. Marcus could imagine the dragon crew checking their databases, probably debating whether a single human was worth the paperwork. Finally, the voice returned, slightly less threatening but still cold as space itself. "Your codes are adequate. You may proceed, but deviate from your filed flight plan by even 1 degree, and you will be eliminated. Do not test our patience, mammal." The connection cut off, and the massive battlecruiser moved away with surprising grace for something so large. Marcus released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, and continued towards Zirion 7. The mining colony was in worse shape than the reports had indicated. What had started as a minor bacterial infection had mutated into something that attacked the nervous system. The human colonists were quarantined in their habdomes, but the real victims were the local fauna. Zirion 7 was home to dozens of species that had no natural immunity to off-world diseases. Marcus spent 3 days working around the clock, synthesizing treatments and coordinating with the medical team via subspace radio. The bacterial strain was unlike anything in the databases, requiring him to essentially create a new antibiotic from scratch using local plant compounds. On the 4th day, as he was taking soil samples near the colony's perimeter, Marcus heard something that made him freeze. It was a sound he'd never heard before but somehow recognized immediately. The crying of a very young, very frightened creature. Following the sound led him to a small crater about half a mile from the main settlement. What he found there changed everything he thought he knew about dragons. Huddled at the bottom of the crater was a dragon whelp, no bigger than a house cat. Its scales were a deep, purple-black color that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. One of its wings was clearly broken, hanging at an odd angle, and there were burns along its side that looked like weapon marks. The little dragon was making soft, mewling sounds that cut straight through Marcus's heart. Its large, golden eyes were filled with pain and terror, and when it saw him approaching, it tried to back away despite its injuries. Marcus had seen enough wounded animals in his career to recognize shock when he saw it. The whelp was dying, probably from internal injuries as much as the visible wounds. Any rational person would have walked away. Dragons were dangerous. Their young were probably even more so. and getting involved with dragon affairs was a sure way to end up as cosmic dust. But Marcus had never been particularly rational when it came to suffering creatures. He slowly descended into the crater, keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. The whelp watched him with those enormous eyes, too weak to flee but still radiating fear. When Marcus was about 10 feet away, he stopped and sat down in the dirt. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I know you're scared, but I'm a doctor. I help creatures who are hurt." The whelp's breathing was rapid and shallow. Marcus could see that several of its ribs were probably broken, and the burns looked infected. Without immediate medical attention, the little dragon would be dead within hours. Moving very slowly, Marcus pulled his field medical kit from his pack. He'd brought extra supplies for the colony, including some broad-spectrum healing compounds that worked on most carbon-based life forms. The whelp watched every movement, but it was too weak to run. "I know you can't understand me," Marcus continued in the same gentle tone. "But I've spent my whole life studying creatures like you." "Well, not exactly like you. You're the first dragon I've ever seen up close. You're beautiful, you know that?" As he spoke, Marcus began to inch closer. The whelp's eyes never left his face, and he could see intelligence there. Even through the pain and fear, dragons were known to be highly intelligent even as adults, but seeing that awareness in something so young and helpless made his chest tight with emotion. When he was close enough to touch, Marcus slowly extended his hand, palm up. The whelp sniffed cautiously, then let out a soft whimper that sounded almost like a question. "That's it," Marcus whispered. "I'm one of the good ones. I promise." The moment his fingers touched the whelp's scales, several things happened at once. First, Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation, like a mild electric shock. Second, the little dragon stopped crying and looked at him with what could only be described as wonder. And third, somewhere high above them, the sky began to darken as something massive blocked out the sun. Marcus looked up to see 3 dragon battlecruisers descending toward the planet's surface, their weapons already charged and ready to fire. The lead ship was even larger than the one he'd encountered earlier, with armor that looked like it could withstand a supernova. The whelp in his arms made a sound that might have been a purr, pressing closer to Marcus's chest as if seeking protection. Marcus felt his heart rate spike as he realized what was happening. He wasn't just holding any dragon whelp. The response from the fleet, the obvious panic in their search patterns, the way the little one seemed to radiate an almost royal bearing even while injured. This was someone very, very important. The lead battlecruiser touched down with surprising gentleness about 100 yards from the crater, and Marcus watched as a boarding ramp extended. What emerged made his knees go weak. The dragon that walked down the ramp was easily 30 feet long, with scales that seemed to absorb light itself. Its eyes burned like twin suns, and when it spoke, the ground trembled beneath its voice. "Where is my son?" Marcus looked down at the little whelp in his arms, then back at the approaching dragon emperor, and realized he might have just made the biggest mistake of his life. Or perhaps, he thought as the whelp nuzzled against his neck with complete trust, the most important choice he'd ever make. The emperor's gaze found the crater, and those burning eyes locked onto Marcus. For a moment that felt like eternity, human and dragons stared at each other across the space between species, between worlds, between the ancient and the new. Then the little whelp in Marcus's arms made a soft chirping sound, and everything changed. The dragon emperor's massive form moved with deadly precision as he approached the crater. Each step sent tremors through the ground, and Marcus could feel the heat radiating from the ancient creature even from a distance. Behind the emperor, more dragons emerged from the battlecruisers, their scales gleaming like living metal in the afternoon sun. Marcus held the injured whelp closer to his chest, feeling the little dragon's rapid heartbeat against his hands. The tiny creature looked up at the approaching emperor and made a weak chirping sound that was clearly meant to be a greeting. The sound that came back from the emperor was like controlled thunder, and Marcus realized he was witnessing something no human had ever seen. A dragon family reunion. "You will place my heir down and step away, human." The emperor's voice boomed across the crater. "Your interference in dragon affairs ends now." Marcus looked down at the whelp, whose golden eyes were fixed on his face with complete trust. The little dragon was still bleeding from several wounds, and its breathing remained labored. Every instinct Marcus had as a doctor told him that moving the whelp now could cause more damage. "Your Majesty," Marcus called out, his voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Your son is badly injured. He has internal bleeding, several broken ribs, and burns that are showing signs of infection. If I move him roughly right now, he could die." The Emperor's eyes flared with an intensity that made the air itself seem to shimmer. "You dare to lecture me about my own offspring? You are nothing but a primitive mammal who stumbled upon something beyond your understanding." Other dragons began to surround the crater, their weapons visible and charged. Marcus counted at least 20 of them, each one capable of reducing him to atoms with a thought. But the whelp in his arms made another soft sound, and Marcus felt something he'd never experienced before. A faint whisper in his mind, like an echo of thought that wasn't his own. Asterisk, trust, safe, help, asterisk. Marcus's eyes widened. Dragons were telepathic. He'd read theories about it in the xenobiology journals, but it had never been proven. The little whelp was somehow communicating with him, sharing its feelings directly. "He's trying to tell you that I'm helping him," Marcus called up to the Emperor. "I think he wants you to know that I'm not a threat." The Emperor's massive head tilted slightly, and those burning eyes seemed to peer directly into Marcus's soul. "Impossible. Humans lack the neural complexity for thought speech. You cannot hear my son's words." Marcus felt the whelp's mind touch his again, this time with more clarity. Images flashed through his consciousness. The whelp playing in a crystal garden, learning to fly with careful supervision, being attacked by unknown assailants with energy weapons, crying alone in the crater as his strength faded away. "He was attacked," Marcus said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "3 ships, unmarked. They shot him down when he was practicing his flight patterns. He's been here for 2 days, waiting to die." The silence that followed was deafening. Every dragon present turned their attention to Marcus with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The Emperor's expression shifted from rage to something much more dangerous, focused interest. "How do you know this?" the Emperor asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his earlier shouting. Marcus realized he'd just revealed something that might get him killed. Humans weren't supposed to be able to communicate with dragons. But the whelp in his arms pressed closer, and he could feel the little creature's need for medical attention growing more urgent by the minute. "I don't know how," Marcus admitted. "But I can hear him. And he's dying. Please, let me help him. I'm a doctor. I've treated hundreds of different alien species. I know I can save him. But we're running out of time." The Emperor studied Marcus for a long moment, then turned his attention to his son. The whelp made a series of soft sounds, and Marcus felt waves of communication passing between them, too complex and rapid for him to follow. Finally, the Emperor's gaze returned to Marcus. "You claim to be a healer," the Emperor said. "Prove it. Save my son, and you will be rewarded beyond your imagination. Fail, and you will suffer for eternities." Marcus nodded, trying not to think about what suffering for eternities might involve when dealing with creatures that lived for thousands of years. Instead, he focused on the whelp's injuries, running his hands gently over the small form to assess the damage. The broken wing was the most obvious problem, but Marcus's enhanced scanner revealed the real issues: a punctured lung, internal bleeding near the liver, and severe dehydration. The burns on the whelp's side had become infected with a bacteria that was slowly poisoning his system. "I need to set up a sterile field," Marcus called out to the Emperor. "And I'll need some of your people to help stabilize him while I work. My warriors do not take orders from humans." One of the other dragons growled, moving closer to the crater's edge. "They do now," the Emperor said quietly, and the warrior immediately stepped back. "This human may be primitive, but he is the only one here with medical knowledge of alien physiology. You will assist him in any way necessary." Marcus spent the next 4 hours performing the most delicate surgery of his career while surrounded by creatures that could have destroyed a city. The whelp remained conscious throughout most of the procedure, his golden eyes fixed on Marcus's face, occasionally sending small waves of gratitude and trust through their strange mental connection. The other dragons watched in complete silence, as Marcus repaired the punctured lung using biocompatible mesh, sealed the internal bleeding with specialized nano-clotting agents, and cleaned and dressed the infected burns. The whelp's wing required the most careful work, as dragon wing bones were incredibly complex structures that had to be perfectly aligned to allow for flight. As Marcus worked, he became aware that more dragons were arriving. The sky above the crater was now filled with ships of various sizes, all holding position in a perfect formation. Word was spreading throughout the Dragon Empire that their emperor's heir had been found, and that a human was attempting to save his life. When Marcus finally finished the surgery, the whelp was breathing normally for the first time since he'd found him. The little dragon's eyes were bright and alert, and the pain that had been radiating from him through their mental link had faded to a manageable level. "He'll need rest and monitoring for the next few days," Marcus told the Emperor, carefully lifting the whelp and holding him out. "But he should make a full recovery." The Emperor approached the edge of the crater, his massive form moving with unexpected gentleness as he reached down to take his son. The moment the whelp was back in his father's arms, Marcus felt their mental connection fade, leaving him feeling strangely empty. "You have done something unprecedented, human," the Emperor said, his voice filled with emotions Marcus couldn't identify. "Not only have you saved my heir, but you have somehow formed a bond with him. This should not be possible." The whelp looked back at Marcus over his father's shoulder and made a soft sound that needed no translation. It was clearly a goodbye. And Marcus felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "What is your name?" the Emperor asked. "Dr. Marcus Chen," he replied, suddenly feeling very small, surrounded by so many massive creatures. "Dr. Marcus Chen," the Emperor repeated, as if testing how the words felt. "You will come with us." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Come with you? But I have responsibilities here. The colony still needs medical supplies, and I have research projects back home. The colony will receive whatever aid they require," the Emperor said with finality. "As for your research, you have just become part of something far more significant than anything you could accomplish in human space." Looking around at the assembled dragons, Marcus realized he didn't have much choice in the matter. But as he watched the little whelp nuzzle against his father's neck, still occasionally glancing back at him with those intelligent golden eyes, Marcus found himself curious about what came next. "What happens now?" he asked. The Emperor's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile, though it revealed teeth the size of daggers. "Now, Dr. Chen, you learn why dragons and humans were never meant to be enemies." The Dragon Emperor's flagship was unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined. The corridors were vast enough for creatures the size of buildings to move comfortably, with walls that seemed to pulse with organic life. Crystalline formations grew from the ceiling like upside-down forests, providing a soft, natural light that made the entire ship feel more like a living ecosystem than a military vessel. Marcus walked beside the Emperor, still trying to process everything that had happened. The little whelp, whose name he'd learned was Prince Zephyr, rode on his father's back, occasionally sending waves of curiosity and friendliness through their mental connection. Apparently, the bond they'd formed during the medical emergency hadn't disappeared entirely. "This is impossible, you know," the Emperor said as they moved through the ship. "In 3,000 years of dragon history, no alien species has ever been able to form a thought bond with one of our kind. The neural pathways simply don't exist in other creatures." "Maybe they do exist," Marcus suggested. "But they're normally dormant. Extreme emotional situations sometimes activate unused parts of the brain. When I found Zephyr, he was dying and desperate to communicate. Maybe that desperation somehow opened a channel that wouldn't normally be available." The Emperor considered this. "You speak of our children with remarkable familiarity for someone who learned of his existence only hours ago. Where I come from, all young creatures deserve protection and care," Marcus replied. "Intelligence level doesn't matter. Age doesn't matter. Species definitely doesn't matter." They entered a vast chamber that served as the Emperor's throne room. The ceiling arched high above them like a cathedral, with viewing ports that showed the stars streaming past as the fleet moved through hyperspace. Other dragons were present, but they maintained a respectful distance as the Emperor settled onto a raised platform that perfectly accommodated his massive form. Prince Zephyr crawled down from his father's back and approached Marcus, his movements still careful due to his healing injuries. The little dragon pressed his head against Marcus's leg, and warmth flooded through their mental connection. Asterisk, packmate, saved, grateful, asterisk. The images that accompanied these thoughts were more complex now. Marcus saw himself from Zephyr's perspective. A strange, small creature that moved with gentle purpose, whose hands brought healing instead of harm, whose mind somehow resonated with dragon consciousness in ways that defied understanding. "He calls you packmate," the Emperor observed, watching this interaction with fascination. "This is a term dragons use only for family members and the closest allies." "I'm honored," Marcus said, gently stroking the scales between Zephyr's eyes. The little dragon practically purred with contentment. "You should be," a new voice said from the chamber's entrance. "Dragons do not bestow such titles lightly." Marcus turned to see another dragon approaching, this one slightly smaller than the Emperor but with scales that seemed to shift color like oil on water. Her presence radiated intelligence and ancient wisdom. "Dr. Chen, this is my mate, Empress Lirelei," the Emperor said. Zephyr's mother, Empress Lirelei, moved closer, studying Marcus with eyes that seemed to see directly through him. "So this is the human who saved our son." "You are." "Not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Marcus asked. "Something more impressive," she replied bluntly. "You're quite small, aren't you? And your technology is primitive. Your ship barely qualifies as spaceflight capable. How did such a limited creature manage to perform complex surgery on dragon physiology?" Marcus felt a flash of irritation but pushed it down. "Because intelligence isn't about size or technology. It's about observation, adaptation, and the willingness to learn. Your son's anatomy isn't fundamentally different from other carbon-based life forms I've treated. The principles of surgery are universal." The Empress tilted her massive head. "Fascinating. You show no fear of us, despite being surrounded by creatures that could end your existence in seconds." "I've learned that fear makes for poor medical decisions," Marcus said. "Besides, you need me too much to kill me right now." Both Emperor and Empress stared at him in surprise. No one had ever spoken to them with such casual directness. "Need you?" the Emperor asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Explain." Marcus gestured to Prince Zephyr, who was still pressed against his side. "Your son has formed a mental bond with me. From what I understand, that's unprecedented. But it also means I might be the key to understanding something much larger." He paused, organizing his thoughts carefully. The attack on Zephyr wasn't random. Unmarked ships, military-grade weapons, precise targeting. Someone wanted to hurt your family specifically. That suggests enemies who understand dragon society well enough to know that attacking the heir would cause maximum political damage. The Emperor's eyes flared. "You believe this was an assassination attempt?" "I know it was," Marcus replied. "And I think whoever did it will try again. But more importantly, I think the ability to communicate with dragons might be the key to stopping them." Empress Lirelei moved closer, her massive form somehow managing to seem curious rather than threatening. "Continue. Think about it," Marcus said, his excitement growing as the pieces fell together. "Dragons are telepathic, but only with each other. Every other species you encounter, you have to rely on technology for communication. That creates barriers, misunderstandings, missed opportunities for alliance." He looked between the two massive creatures. "But if humans can develop this mental connection with dragons, we become natural intermediaries. We could help you understand other species better. Build bridges instead of walls." Prince Zephyr sent a wave of agreement through their connection, along with images of different alien species working together, sharing knowledge and resources. "The child approves of this concept," the Empress observed. "But there are still questions. How do we know this ability can be replicated? How do we know you won't use it against us?" Marcus knelt down to Zephyr's level, looking into those intelligent golden eyes. Because I've seen what we can accomplish when species work together instead of fighting. The bacterial outbreak on Zirion 7 is a perfect example. Human medical knowledge, local plant compounds, and dragon transportation capabilities could have solved that crisis in days instead of months. He stood up, facing the Emperor and Empress with growing confidence. Your people are ancient and wise, but you've isolated yourselves. Humans are young and eager, but we're limited by our technology and lifespan. Together, we could achieve things neither species could manage alone. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment, considering Marcus's words. And you believe this mental connection between you and my son is the beginning of such cooperation? I think it's proof that the barriers between our species aren't as absolute as everyone believed, Marcus said. Zephyr and I connected because we both recognized something fundamental. The desire to help others, to protect the innocent, to make things better instead of worse. Prince Zephyr chirped softly and sent Marcus an image of vast libraries filled with dragon knowledge, human researchers working alongside dragon scholars, ships designed with the best of both technologies exploring distant galaxies. Ambitious dreams for such a small creature, Empress Lirelei said, but her tone had shifted from skepticism to interest. My species specializes in ambitious dreams, Marcus replied. It's how we went from living in caves to traveling between stars in just a few thousand years. The Emperor and Empress exchanged a look that clearly involved high-level telepathic communication. Finally, the Emperor turned his attention back to Marcus. Very well, Dr. Chen. You wish to build bridges between our species? You will have the opportunity. But understand that failure will have consequences that extend far beyond your own life. What do you mean? Marcus asked. You will remain with our fleet as our first human advisor, the Emperor explained. You will help us understand human psychology and culture, just as we will teach you about dragon society and technology. But more importantly, you will help us track down whoever attacked my son. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Track them down? The attack on Zephyr was an act of war against the Dragon Empire, Empress Lirelei said, her voice hardening to match her mate's. Such acts cannot go unanswered. But this enemy is clever, using unmarked ships and unknown technology. Traditional dragon methods of retaliation may not be sufficient. We need someone who thinks differently, the Emperor continued. Someone who can see patterns we might miss, who understands how other species operate. Someone who has already proven he can accomplish the impossible. Prince Zephyr pressed closer to Marcus, sending waves of excitement and anticipation through their connection. The little dragon's images now showed Marcus working alongside dragon warriors, using his unique perspective to solve mysteries and prevent conflicts. Marcus looked around the vast throne room, at the alien but somehow welcoming environment, at the creatures who had started as feared enemies and were rapidly becoming something like friends. He thought about his quiet research lab back in human space, his predictable routine, his safe but limited life. When do we start? He asked. The Emperor's expression shifted into that unsettling smile again. We already have. Welcome to the Dragon Empire, Dr. Marcus Chen. Try not to get us all killed. As if on cue, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Dragons rushed to their stations with military precision, while Marcus stood in the center of it all, holding a dragon prince and wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Through their mental connection, Zephyr sent him a final image. Marcus standing on the bridge of a dragon warship, pointing toward distant stars while dragons and humans worked side by side, exploring the galaxy as partners rather than rivals. Perhaps, Marcus thought as he followed the Emperor toward the command center, some dreams were worth the risk after all.